He's going to talk about generalized hunting in Indiana, which is where we live. Mike?
Students, I see a few people who came back for a second go around with me, and I see a couple of new faces and some guys that weren't here last year or that were here last week. I noticed are gone, so I guess maybe they really learned their lesson last week. But last week we were talking about fishing, and this week we're going to talk about hunting. And to start off, just to sort of get a feel for the audience and get everybody warmed up a little bit, I just want to know how many people that are in here are hunters. Okay. How many people in here don't hunt, but either support the concept of hunting or really, you really don't care one way or another about hunting? Okay. Is there anybody in here with enough courage of their convictions to admit that they're an anti-hunter? Okay, well, perhaps we don't have any of those kinds around, or maybe they just don't have the amount of courage. But studies have shown that actually, you know, we have a larger proportion of hunters in the room, which is understandable because of the content of the course and the what we're going to be talking about tonight. But actually, about 10 or 12% of the people nationwide either support hunting or are active hunters. About 80% of the people are really quite ambivalent to hunting. Maybe they don't hunt or they don't hunt, and they don't really care one way or another whether anybody else hunt. And there are about 10% of the people that are disapprove of hunting. And really only a small percent of that 10% are actual anti-hunters, in the animal extremist point of view. But anyway, hunting in the United States and throughout a lot of the world has become a controversial question. Now, it's not always been that way. You know, when the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower and the pioneers, moved across the country and settled the North America, they not only accepted but they promoted the concept of hunting. Of course, they also relied on the game that they hunted for as a vital part of the food that they ate. So, for them it may have been hunt or starve. Now you can jump ahead a century or more in our history, and hunting still was not controversial. But even then, in the late 1800s and on into the early part of the 1900s, the majority of the population in the country was rural in nature, and even the city folks lived much closer to the land because they didn't have freezers and things like that. And chickens and hogs and things like that were raised right in town. That's why Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked the lantern over in downtown Chicago and burned the place down, because having livestock even in a urban setting was not that unusual. And I think because of that, people had a better appreciation of life and death and animals and using animals for food, and how humans fit into the scheme of things. Nowadays that's not the case. I have friends that live in the city who don't even know how to cook sweet corn. They've never seen it. I gave them some, well, this is great, but what do I do with it? And that's how far divorced from the way many of us know how food is provided and how a lot of people see food. To them, food comes from grocery stores, and meat comes in packages, and usually the meat's already ground up and put in the little packages, and there's absolutely no association with a living creature or a living plant or anything with something that you're actually go out and eat. And I think because of that, hunting has become controversial. I can see the connection, and perhaps I hope you can too. The fact that people that are anti-hunters are anti-killing, and they don't perceive how every thing that they eat and every time they have a hamburger, it's the result of something getting killed. Anyway, I'm going to climb off my whatever little high horse I was on. I want to tell you a little basic biology about hunting. I'm here because I didn't get quite the introduction I did last week. I'm assistant manager over at Willow Slough Fish and Wildlife area, and I've been a wildlife biologist for over 20 years. Graduated from Purdue University. So anyway, that's why I'm here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the biology of wildlife and game animals in particular, and a little bit of the biological basis of hunting. Okay, I have a little quiz. Does anybody know how long a bobwhite quail lives? Anybody want to venture a guess how long a bobwhite quail lives?
Is it like 6 or 8 years?
6 or 8 years?
Average.
Maybe a year. How about a pheasant? Anybody know how long a pheasant lives? Year or so, year or two? A rabbit? How about a rabbit? Mike, got any idea how long a rabbit lives?
6 months.
Well, I'll tell you. Actually, you're pretty close. Average lifespan of a bobwhite quail is about 42 days. That's not very long. Pheasants maybe 4 or 5 months. Rabbits, a few weeks. That's the average. If you take all the ones that are born, all the ones that live to be ripe old, big old buck rabbits, and all the ones that drop out between being born and along the way, most of them never live long enough to breed the following year. A recent study in Missouri revealed that 95% of all quail that are born one spring do not survive to breed the following year. It's a tough world out there to be a wild animal. But it's just because of this high mortality that hunting for small game animals has virtually no effect on wildlife populations. Now, hunting seasons are normally held in the fall and in the early winter. And that's the time of the year when wildlife populations are at the peak of their annual levels. They start off real low in the spring, just the ones that were lucky enough, or actually luck had nothing to do with it, the ones that were cunning enough and strong enough to survive the winter form the breeding stock for the following year's production. And then they start breeding, and the population goes up as they nest and maybe re-nest through the year until all the babies are full grown, and the population is as high in September and October and November and the early part of the year as it's going to be. Now, Mother Nature knows, and the habitat dictates, that only a certain number of the animals are going to make it through the winter. And to ensure that that certain number of animals is enough, and to ensure that to be on the safe side, what has evolved in most game animals, small game animals, and most small animals in general. I mean, it's just as true for prairie voles and field mice and chipmunks as it is for squirrels and rabbits and pheasants and quail, is to spew forth lots and lots of babies to make sure it's sort of the shotgun effect. If we put enough of them out there, a few of them are going to survive. I don't know if somebody wants to run the numbers on it real quick, but I saw someplace where somebody had started figuring out that, rabbits here in Indiana can and will start breeding in March. And rabbits are capable of producing up to 10 young rabbits in a litter. Most of them aren't that large, but they can. And rabbits will become sexually mature when they're about 2 months old. So a rabbit that was born in March, April will be having babies of its own in May, and it'll be a grandparent by August, and they keep on breeding right on up till early October. And if one rabbit was bred and it had 10 babies, and then it had 10, all of its babies survived, and then it had 10 babies, and it was something like by the end of summer, or you got like 200,000 rabbits or something. I don't know if that number's right, but boy, you got a heck of a lot of rabbits, So it's probably a very good thing that there is a few of these things dropping out along the way, or we'd be all up to our waist in rabbits in no time. Anyway, what happens is hunting for small game is basically what biologists call compensatory mortality. And what that means is that the rabbits or the quail or the pheasants that we harvest during the hunting season in October, November, December are surplus animals. Mother Nature does not play favorites, and chances are if we shoot one in October, it just replaces one that was going to croak sometime in February or March anyway. So it virtually makes no effect on the population the next year. Matter of fact, there was a study done on bobwhite quail in Missouri a couple of years ago, and basically there was 3 tracts of land. There was a hunting area that had a river that ran right through the middle of it, and the habitat and the land area on both sides of the river were basically identical. Same sort of habitat, same amount of crops and things like that, and had basically the same amount of bobwhite quail population. A few miles away was another tract of land that they did not allow any hunting on at all, and basically it had the same population. So what the study involved, boil it down, they had one tract of land that no hunting on. There was another tract of land that they only allowed a sporadic amount of hunting on. I think they only hunted it like on Saturday mornings or something like that. The other tract of land was open for the whole hunting season. They'd gone out and various methods had found out how many quail were on each of these tracts of land, and basically there was a good quail population, and the population was nearly identical on each one of them. On the tract of land that was hunted heavily every day of the season that anybody wanted to show up, about 70% of the quail that were there at the beginning of the season were harvested by the hunters. On the tract of land that was hunted sporadically, only about 30% of the quail on that tract of land were harvested, and on the one that was never hunted at all, of course, there was no harvest. They went back in the end of the next summer after all the breeding was done, and the quail populations were basically identical on all 3 tracts of land. So basically the theory of compensatory mortality proved out once again, and hunting had no effect on the population. There was one other effect though. On the tract of land that was open all the time, 70% of the birds were shot, and by the end of the season it was hard to even convince a hunter to go and hunt on that tract of land. As far as they were concerned, 100% of the birds were shot. What birds were left out there evidently were too clever to be effectively hunted, You know, they'd been through the game and they knew how to escape from the dogs and the guns and where to go that the hunters wouldn't go and how to escape before the hunters got to them. And the success rate was low. Now, basically what biologists call this is the law of diminishing returns, in that if hunters are only out there hunting for sport, for the fun of being out there and hunting and hoping that they can shoot a rabbit or a pheasant or anything, they're going to give up far before the population gets so low that you're actually cutting into any of the breeding stock, just because it takes just a very few animals, and you know, one rabbit, 200,000 rabbits, doesn't take very many of them to get the population back on track for the next year. Now, big game is different. Basically, deer and elk and antelope and things, but whitetail deer around here commonly live until their breeding age. You know, they don't normally die off. Normally a fawn that's born in May, if it doesn't get shot, there's not any predators around here anymore, it will live until it gets to breeding age, and then it will breed. And so the reason for hunting deer, the biological basis on it, is different than it is for hunting small game. As I said, there's not any predation. And in a pristine ecosystem, you know, with only a few half-naked Indians running around, predators were what kept deer populations in check. But by average centered, in this day and age, predators basically aren't tolerated by average citizens. Predators and livestock don't go together. Any place that you do have predators left in the country, where there are wolves and pumas, other than a few pumas running around the St. Joe area, but there's not much livestock. And if you had a lot of wolves and predators to keep the deer populations depressed around here, they probably wouldn't, because what happens is that the predators they're not exactly stupid, and they realize it's a heck of a lot easier to go out and eat a stupid farm animal than it is to jump on a deer or a moose or an elk or antelope and run them down. So without predators, big game populations keep expanding and expanding and expanding till one of two things happens. Either they eat themselves out of house and home and they starve to death, or the deer turn into vermin. You know, vermin are animals that nobody likes. You get a whole bunch of rats in your corn crib, you got vermin. You got a bunch of squirrels in your corn crib, you got vermin. If you got a whole bunch of deer that's eating every grain of corn that you produce, deer have become vermin. Now, neither situation is a natural situation, and that's what some animal extremists would have happen. They realize, or maybe they don't realize, but they, rather than have hunters harvest surplus animals and keep populations under control, they would have people have the deer just starve to death, because it's only natural, but it's not. In the natural ecosystems that existed before white men came to the United States, it was very rare for a deer or a moose or an elk to starve to death in the winter, because the predator populations and the half-naked Indians that were running around fulfilled their role in the ecosystem and kept everything pretty much into a balance. Now, in modern days, it's up to the hunters to be the predator, and they have become the tool of wildlife managers to control populations. Now, there's one other good thing about hunters. Well, there's several other nice things about hunters. I have lots of them that are friends. I'm a hunter. But how many people have heard hunters pay for conservation? You know, that's like a bumper sticker you've seen thousands of times, you know, but it's true. hunters do pay for conservation. Another couple of facts that I want you to, last week it just bugged me, all the college students, every time I'd say something, they write this down in their notes and everything. Don't write that down. This is something, if you want to write it down, here's something you should have in your notes. No species of animal has ever become threatened or extinct because of sport hunting. Okay? None. It's never happened. Now, there are animals that have become endangered or threatened or extinct that were hunted, but basically it was not sport hunting. Passenger pigeons used to fly over the Midwest by the millions and billions, I guess, and they were hunted heavily. But it wasn't even hunting that caused their demise. What caused the demise of the passenger pigeon was habitat changes. Basically, they lived in the north woods, and man moved in the north woods and chopped down the big pine trees, and they didn't have any place to nest anymore. Had a few other problems, like they only laid one egg a year and things like that, but basically it was habitat destruction that caused it. The buffalo were once hunted and were hunted to extinction, but it was done as basically the government got rid of the buffalo because it was the only way that they could civilize the half-naked Indians that were running around, was to deprive them of their food source and move them all onto the reservation. And so they were hunted to extinction, but certainly it was not hunters, sport hunters, that did the dirty deed. And the fact is that hunters pay for conservation through license fees, have funded more habitat work than any other group of people have funded anything else, anytime, anywhere. Ducks Unlimited is a private hunting, basically a hunter-supported private institution that tries to, that their goal is to keep North America's waterfowl populations going and strong, and they're bigger than Jerry Lewis's telethon. Everybody's heard of Jerry Lewis and his Labor Day telethon. Only people that are duck hunters know very much about Ducks Unlimited. And besides the license dollars going into the state and federal government coffers to perform the conservation duties of the states, there's others besides Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Quail Unlimited, and probably Wild Turkey Federation, Grouse Society. Practically every species of game animal now has its own little support group, and most of those are supported strictly by hunters. And hunters also fund the conservation police across the country. Got one sitting back here in the corner, Alan, and their duty is not only to enforce the game laws that help protect wild populations, but they also enforce a wide variety of environmental laws that help out society in general, not just the hunters. Now, remember at the beginning the percentages that I quoted about 80% of the citizens who are ambivalent to hunting and all. I want to talk about those guys for a little while. Now, those 80% they're sort of the swing votes. The 10% that are anti-hunting or non-hunters, and especially the part of those that are animal extremists, probably no amount of talking is going to sway them one way or another. And basically the amount of hunters and the amount of non-hunters that exist sort of cancel each other out. So if we were going to put it to a vote, whether we should have hunting or whether we shouldn't have hunting, then it will be the 80% that are in the middle that are going to be the ones that that have to be swayed and that are going to decide the question. Well, several recent studies have targeted just that group of people. Just the group of people that really don't care one way or another about hunting. You know, they're not rabid anti-hunters, and they're not avid hunters that, you know, can't get to sleep the night before opening day. Just people like my sisters and stuff, I guess, that, you know, don't really care. But the results of these studies are I guess somewhat understandable, but in my mind anyway, they present me with quite a dilemma in how to perceive it and how to work with it. Surprisingly, many of this big pool of people that are just non-hunters, I'll call them, many of them are aware of the role that hunters play in controlling populations, wildlife populations, speaking of big game, I suppose, and they approve of that role that hunters play. You know, I guess they don't want to have, you know, be up to their waist in rabbits or see the cornfields being eaten by deer any more than others, or they know that the deer are going to starve. When Indiana went into the state parks in the last couple of years and started hunting because of the overpopulation of the deer in there, by and large, the non-hunting public supported that. We have questionnaires that prove it, regardless of what you may have heard or seen in the newspapers and other media. It was supported by the rank and file citizens. And surprisingly, many of the people that are in this large group of hunters approve of hunters' role of funding conservation. And so I guess that message is getting out. There's enough bumper stickers that have been seen that said hunters pay for conservation, that they understand that. Or perhaps they see signs that say Willow Slough over here or Jasper Pulaski over here, and they realize that places like that were bought and paid for and maintained by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. Most of this group approve of hunting if the game that gets killed gets eaten by the hunters and their families. And that's understandable too. Maybe this urban mentality that meat only comes in little wrappers that says Big Mac on it isn't as bad as I think. But there is one side note that comes by it. There is a large percentage of these people that think that a lot of the game meat that gets shot ends up being wasted. Either the people throw it away or don't like it or whatever. You know, I don't personally think that's the case, and I deal with lots and lots and lots of hunters, but that perception is out there, that a lot of the meat gets wasted. Now, there were a lot of other questions that were involved in the survey, and you know, about guns and safety and perception of hunters and things like that. And most of those sort of scored in the mediocre range, you know, about where people would where you would perceive that they would score, and that doesn't bother me. But there is a couple of parts that bother me, is where the dilemma comes in. Non-hunters strongly disapproved of people that hunt for trophies. Now, perhaps, and by trophies I assume by shooting a pheasant or a wood duck because it's a beautiful bird and they want to get it stuffed and mounted as a trophy, or hunting for the biggest mature deer because they have the largest antlers, you know, and to make nice trophies. Anyway, that's what trophies are. You know, part of maybe semantics. I don't know what the non-hunters. I know what a trophy is to me as a hunter. Maybe what a trophy is to a non-hunter is different. But basically they disapproved of people hunting for trophies. And perhaps it goes back to eating the game. They feel that there are people that are out there and kill things strictly for the antlers or strictly for the nice taxidermy work, and the animal's not going to be eaten. Anyway, that's one of the things that bothered them. Non-hunters also strongly disapproved as hunting for recreation as well. It's almost as if they're saying, go ahead and hunt for all these noble causes that you hunt, but by God, don't have no fun doing it. Well, I got news for you. Hunting is fun, and it's enjoyable and challenging and exhilarating and just as exciting as downhill skiing or whitewater rafting or shooting a nice basket from the three-point line or getting a hole-in-one sometimes. I know when I shot the big buck this fall, I couldn't have been more thrilled if I had shot a 150-yard hole-in-one with a 7-iron. But all these, enjoyment, the challenge, and the exhilaration and all that, basically I just, that's fun in a broad sense of the word. And that's basically why hunters hunt. And that's one of the reasons why people that are non-hunters think that people shouldn't hunt. Yes?
I have a question though. I'd be in the category of non-hunter.
Sure.
And like when you say they disapprove of hunting for recreation,
Right?
when someone said that to me, I would think that they just like, when someone does it for recreation, that they just go out, shoot it, laugh, yay, great time, walk away and leave it lying there dead on the ground. And I would disapprove of that too.
Sure.
I think that's more like what that sentence, that's what it brings to my mind.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it could be. But that's one of the things that was brought out in the survey. And like I say, some of it may just be the way a non-hunter would read the question and the way a hunter would read the question and the way we perceive the answers. But anyway, I deal with hundreds of hunters every year and thousands and thousands of hunters in the past 20 years. And I've never had one of them say, I got up this morning and decided I was going to come out here and go hunting so I could buy a license and do my part to fund conservation, And I really have never had any of them say, I was going to sleep in this morning, but even though it's 20 degrees outside and the wind's blowing, I knew that deer herd was going to overpopulate, and so I figured I better get out there and do my part to knock that herd back a little bit, so that they don't starve or eat Farmer Brown's crops next year. And though most people hunt somewhat for the meat that they derive from it, it's not a very effective way or a very economical way to put meat on the table. By far, save the money that you spend on gas and guns and ammo and decoys and all the rest of paraphernalia and buy some food. Take the amount of time that you spend in a deer stand or a duck blind or something like that and pump gas down at one of Blake's gas stations and get some money and go buy food. If all you're wanting to do is put food on the table, that's the way to do it. Hunting is not a very good way to do it. But those are the main reasons that non-hunters support hunting. And now I do know hunters that hunt for the trophies. That mostly these are fellows that have hunted for years and years, and they enjoy the special challenge of seeking out the biggest and the smartest animals, the ones that don't get harvested on the opening weekend of the season because they're the dummies of the group. They're the ones that have survived seasons after seasons, and these are the guys that are not very successful year in and year out, but the challenge of putting their skills up against the wiles of the wild animal that they're after is why they're out there, you know, and they're after a trophy. And I don't really object to that at all, and perhaps that's just something that, you know, if you're faced with it, a person that's a non-hunter, you just have to agree to disagree about. And I know lots of hunters who just hunt for the pure enjoyment of it, the satisfaction, and you know, basically the fun of hunting. And I think that's the main reason that most people do hunt nowadays. So I will answer some questions if anyone has any about anything that I've covered, but I'm not going to try to solve this puzzle because there probably isn't any solution. And if that sort of raises a little dilemma in your mind, well, at least I know that I'm not the only guy that's worrying about that from now on. So does anybody have any questions about anything? We have, you know, 10 minutes or so before break time, and we can, I'll be glad to answer them. Anybody? Man, last week I was fishing, I had lots of questions.
What are the main sports, hunting, animals, what are the main games in Indiana? What do people hunt for?
Well, for small game, squirrels and rabbits are number one and number two, and that fluctuates from year to year. Sometimes there's more squirrels and sometimes there's more rabbits. And deer have really come on strong. When I was a kid and growing up in Brook, I can remember my mom came in all excited one time, and she had seen a deer driving from Hazelden towards the town of Brook, standing out in the guy's field, you know. And I mean, I was thunderstruck. I remember the first deer I saw, I was at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in 1964, on a Boy Scout camporee, National Jamboree. That was the first time I ever saw a deer. I was 14 years old, lived in Indiana my whole life. My son's sitting over here, he shot one when he was 11. So, anyway, the population has really skyrocketed on deer, and that's quite a popular sport. There's like 200,000 people that deer hunt in Indiana each year, the number that pops into my mind. In this area, pheasants are quite popular, but it's only in this small portion of the state that pheasants exist. Pheasants take prairie-type soils, and anybody that's studied any geology or whatever realizes that there was only true prairie over a small portion of Indiana, basically Benton County, and then take the counties that are touching Benton County was where the prairie lands basically existed, and that's where pheasants exist nowadays.
Where does turkey fall in on the list of hunting
Well,
and ranking?
I'm not positive. Seems like around 20,000 turkey hunters in the state, something like that, so maybe 1/10 as popular as...
Where I'm from, turkey hunting is almost as popular as deer. I'm from the southern part of the state.
Well, that, I'm not surprised that it is. It probably is as popular as bow hunting for deer. It's probably not really as popular as hunting with shotguns for deer, you know. But that's another animal that was once thought to be extinct. It's kind of funny, when Indiana first started reintroducing deer, turkeys into Indiana, the first thing the biologists thought they should do was go out and find where turkeys now existed in the United States, and I can still remember going to the meetings where they said to have a turkey. The only place they found any wild turkeys, you know, this is back in the 50s and 60s, was in the absolute pure wilderness areas, and they decided they needed to find a place in Indiana that was 10 miles square, 100 square miles basically, that was continuous forest, with no roads going through it, because that was the places that there were still turkeys left in Alabama and Mississippi and places like that. And that's what it took. That's how elusive and seclusive these turkeys were. And we didn't have any places that really fit the bill, but we had some places close, so that's where the turkeys were introduced first. And that was like one of the credos of turkey reintroduction biologists across the country. And but the state of Iowa and Missouri, they didn't have any place that even came close to that. And but they sure wanted to have turkeys, and they had some hot rod biologists that were able to cut some deals with the people that did have turkeys to get some turkeys, and so they just went out and dumped them. You know, you dump a turkey out in Iowa, that's like dumping one out here on the, if they're lucky, if they got something like the Iroquois River to go on, some hedgerows and a few hills and hollers and willows. Well, in less than a decade, the annual turkey harvest in Iowa and Missouri was well into 5 digits, and Indiana was still hoping to have a turkey season sometime when they got the population level up to the point that they thought that it could stand being hunted. And it turned out that the biologists were completely wrong. Actually, the only place the turkeys were left in Mississippi and Tennessee and Alabama was the places that were so far back in the hills that the hillbillies hadn't already shot them all. And once they were introduced out into places where and given protection and were looked on as a game animal and were not shot on sight as either vermin or a handy thing for lunch, they prospered quite well. And now in Indiana, that turkeys have been introduced virtually all over the state. All the major river systems now have turkeys, other than maybe the Iroquois. But they'll get there eventually. And the turkey populations are really skyrocketing, and the interest in turkey hunting is growing by leaps and bounds any place that there are turkey available to be hunted. One of the nice things about turkey hunting for people that are non-hunters is you don't hunt them in the fall like you do the other species of animals. You hunt them in the spring, and you only hunt for the males. And the biological reason for this is that turkeys are harem gatherers. One male will have a harem of as many hens as it can keep track of, basically 6 or 7 commonly, and so there is a surplus of gobblers because there's half boys and half girls born in the spring, and the hunting season takes place after the major breeding season, and so you have a bunch of gobblers running around there that don't have anything better to do, so and they have nothing left to contribute to next year's crop of baby turkeys. And so that's why the harvest is done at that time.
Has Indiana passed the anti-hunter harassment law yet?
Yes, matter of fact, I just saw a thing recently that, I forget which state it was, maybe Hawaii was the last state to fall in line, and now every state in the nation has anti-hunter harassment laws. And basically that says it's anti-hunters. It is illegal for people to go out and disturb somebody that's hunting just because you don't think it's right to be hunting. It's not a very safe thing to do either, but there have not been any problems along those lines. Yep.
I got a 2-part question.
Sure.
Why is there no turkey hunting north of Route 10? And secondly, what's the best area in Willow Slough for rabbit hunting?
Well, the reason for north of Route 10 was because it was an easy way to open Newton County, all of Newton County except for LaSalle Fish and Wildlife Area to turkey hunting, because it's only been a couple years since they turned the turkeys loose from LaSalle. And you will not be able to hunt turkeys north of Route 10 this year, but in the spring of '96, but in '97 that rule will be rescinded and you'll be able to hunt turkeys on the north side of
I
Route 10.
take that way to work all the time. I see them on the north side constantly.
Well, maybe those are some of LaSalle's birds. You know, turkeys are also ones that, you know, probably the average turkey still doesn't live for a full year, but once they get past a month or two old, they're pretty robust animals, and they can live multiple years. So you can build a population there, sort of cross between those, you know, small game that most of them die and big game that most of them don't die. And what was the other half?
What's
Oh,
the
what
best-
best place for rabbits at Willow Slough?
Yeah.
Well, when I used to run rabbits a lot, I hunted a lot in Area 10 and Area 6. And early in the season, I would go, like especially in the October part of the season, I hunted strictly the large grass fields, like in Area 13 and Area 9.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Are wild turkeys being introduced into White County?
Into White County, not that I know of, but they may have, I don't.
I saw a field, with some guys saying there's wild turkeys out there, and it's, I don't know if you're familiar with Monticello, it was on the road behind Indiana Beach and behind the campground. There was.
I don't know.
I think they're planning, because last year I went down to a seminar down in Lafayette, and they hadn't actually released them down there, but they...
Well, see, one of the things that turkeys do, I mean, they spread out, and so the idea is to put turkeys, you know, around. You know, they put turkeys at LaSalle Fish and Wildlife Area, and they put them up at Plymouth on the Kankakee River, and then there's turkeys at Jasper, Pulaski, and they expect in due time that, you know, these populations will all merge and spread out. So I know there are some turkey release sites like in Tippecanoe County, you know, and it wouldn't be that hard for them to follow the Tippecanoe River drainage on up, you know, and get up into White County. So, you know, when JP was one of the first places in northwest Indiana, Jasper, Pulaski, and in a matter of weeks, we had a turkey that was within a half mile of Willow Slough, and then it ended up sort of taking up residence back over by Fair Oaks, over around I-65. Finally got hit by a semi, but
Can I ask a question about
Yeah.
that? That particular bird, there were rumors. 'cause
had the
we'd
orange
seen-
wings flaps on it. Yeah.
There were rumors, she was sighted, well, we've seen her a couple times, or seen her before, but she disappeared for a while, and all of a sudden, the next spring, she appeared with a jake. That was supposedly before the slough had it.
Yeah, she was around for several years before we had them. I don't know what the timetable was.
My question was, though, would she travel that far back to pick a jake up? If that's where she came from? Who knows?
Who knows? I wouldn't have guessed. I thought she was probably just frustrated, but that's why she finally jumped out in front of a semi over I-65. Okay, well, I'll be around, and we got a couple of hunting experts to give their little tips and tactics for the second half. So I guess it's about time for coffee break, right, Doctor?
What's the status of pheasant hatching at Jasper, Plaza? Are they still doing it?
Yes?
For those of you not native to this area, at one time they were the largest pheasant hatcheries in the world. Are they still claim
Well,
that?
I doubt, no, I've never heard that claim, but they raise about 20 or 22,000 pheasants a year. Depending, it's hard to count them. Somewhere in that area.
For those of you who have never been there, when the baby pheasants are in the pen, you go out, gobble, gobble, and they make all kind of noise.
We do have some hunting guides to go along with your fishing guides that we passed out last week, so.
Are those the new ones?
No, this is what, 95, 96, so we'll probably have
That's
like
new.
turkey stuff in it.
Do you know, you mentioned pumas as a natural predator of deer.
Right?
Do you know the last puma to be in Rensselaer? Do you know this? Do you know how the
No.
pumas got to be pumas? The St. Joe mascot used to be the Indians. And they were the St. Joe Indians till, this is historically true, I guess 1930s, 1937, 38, when some predator started coming to Rensselaer and raiding all the local chicken houses, killing chickens and turkeys and geese. They finally couldn't find out who it was. And so they sent off to Purdue University to find out if they had some footprints. They had some animal tracks. And they brought this knowledgeable person in and he found these tracks. And he says, that's a puma. Well, there wasn't anybody in the county that had ever seen or heard of a puma, but they said, well, if he says so, he's from Purdue, he must know everything. So the St. Joe student body thought that that was just the greatest thing they ever heard, and they became the St. Joe Pumas and have been ever since. So there are still pumas alive in Jasper County, but they have more than 4 toes, and they don't kill chickens. We're going to break now for 10 minutes. Be back here. It's 8 o'clock, and we'll be ready to go. Coffee and donuts. Portion, which is tonight's show. I started asking everybody, many of the people in this room, who could we get to be hunters? Who are the hunters? Who are the really good hunters in the county? And everybody said, oh, probably the best hunter we know of is Fuzz Kohley, but you'll never get him to come. He won't do it. So I called him one night and I said, how about it? And he said, sure, I'll come. So, Harold Fuzz Kohley, tell us all about hunting.
I don't know about that. Well, as he said, he invited me here. I'm going to try to do my best. My name's Harold Kohley. I like to hunt. And the definition that I got out of a dictionary on hunt is the pursuit of animals for food and for sport. I also enjoy spending a lot of time out in the woods. My first, recently the other day, I was over to Willis Slough checking on the ice fishermen, and I proceeded to drive back in a closed area, which is usually closed throughout the summer. And in this area, it's called Mormon's Hill, and it's kind of a blowed off area where there was sand and stuff. And I proceeded to hunt Indian artifacts over there, which was some of our first hunters. You find this type stuff. You wonder what they hunted with that. And you find pieces of pottery. You wonder what they cooked in that. So, the way I first got started, I would say, my dad probably got me started. We used to take me out and use me as the dog, kicking up the rabbits, and then he'd shoot. Back when I was a kid, during the winter time, it was nothing to have 5 or 6 rabbits skinned out and hanging on a wire out where they had the sausage rolled up, because they didn't have deep freezes back then. The local deep freeze was in town. Then I kind of progressed along on the hunting, went out on my own. Of course, the weapon was a stick. And you would track these rabbits around, and where they would go under brush and stuff, you would try to sneak in on them, and you either snuck up behind them and snapped them, or you would crawl up behind them and jump on the pile of stuff they were under and reach under there and catch them. So, as time went along, I progressed because I had a cat that I was using. They have road culverts under the road, so I take this pet cat down there, stick him in the one end, and I put a sack over the other end and sit there and wait. Pretty quick, out come the rabbit in the sack. So I proceeded to give the cat the heart and the liver, you know, after you gutted him and gutted. Anyway, so this cat got to the place where he was outsmart me. It'd go in here and the rabbit wouldn't come out. Pretty quick he'd sneak up and you'd hear thump, thump, thump. Well, I didn't get any rabbit. So I outsmarted the cat then. I put string on the cat, run the cat through, call the cat through there, and then I took the string off and proceeded to pull a piece of wire through here, double the length of the culvert, tied a gunny sack on this side. One night I'd pull it one way, next night I'd pull it the other way. I'd trap my own rabbit, see? I didn't have to need no cat no more. So then as you went along, why, you started hunting with different friends and you soon learned the facts of safety, who was the fast shots. When it come time to go home, well, the one guy, he'd say, well, I only want one. He'd go and pick out one that wasn't all shot up. So you finally learn to mark your game that you shot. That's as you progress along, see. Okay, now this evening, from there on, why, I eventually got old enough that my dad, I could use his shotgun, and then when I'd get home from school, why, I'd pull some sniper attics. I had an old chicken out in the cornfield there, and I'd run in the house and go upstairs and open the window, and there'd always be some crows out there. Well, I learned to be a pretty good shot like that, which improved the coming of hunting with a rifle. Now this evening I wanted to explain kind of the size of guns that most hunters use. Most everybody here knows everything about what I'm talking about, but some of you probably don't. Your gun size shots, shells, this is what they call a 410 shell. The size of the shell, the bigger the number, is usually the smaller the shell. This is like a 410, and it goes from 20 gauge, they got 20 gauge, 16, 12, and 10 gauge guns. This would be like, I think this is a 20. This comes up to, I haven't got a shell for everything, but this is in your 3-inch Magnum, or a 3-inch 12 gauge shell. A 10 gauge shell is naturally bigger. Now they're making even a 3.5-inch shell of this kind. And I think maybe in the 10. Now the size of shot that's in these, I've got this, and in most of those shells, I've got this thing I'm going to pass around, and Lord knows I need this back, because I borrowed it from the gun shop, Jerry's gun shop here in Rensselaer, and he said, you'll pay for it if it doesn't come back. So on here I've got taped the deer slug, which is used, comes out of a casing like this, but this gives you the idea of what's in there. And when I'm talking about shot, the different sizes used for different animals, this will give you an idea in case somebody doesn't know, so you can pass that around and kind of look at it. Okay, I've wrote down here different things that the most commonly we hunt around here are rabbits, and they can be found about everywhere, even in town. Of course, you don't shoot them in town, but some people feel like it when they get in their gardens and stuff like that. And they're hunted by using dogs and different gauge guns, what anybody feels comfortable using. You can use a 410 rifle if you want to walk the stock and see him set and shoot him with a rifle, or fine and dandy. But the most common shot they use is like 4s, 5s, and 6s. And in the past, some of us have gone hunting, and I find out that sometimes you don't need a dog. If you go like with 2 guys or 3 guys, you can get one guy standing still, but you gotta know where he's standing and he's gotta stay there. The other 2 guys can walk around out here and you just start, kind of one guy go in front of the head of the other one and out and around, and you just start barking like dogs, and this guy back here is gonna get some shooting. So we've learned to do that. Take turns hunting in that way, and this one particular guy I took out, he took off and he's a-barking, and I says, man, that ain't it. You gotta get back here, you sound like a foxhound, we're hunting rabbits. Anyway, on rabbits, some people just, when they kill them, they just jam them in their coat. Well, you've got kind of a mess in there sometimes. And myself, when we're out hunting, most of the time it's in the winter time and you got snow cover. So normally you pull the head off. You can do that by just standing on it. Some of them just twist it off. You stand on it, get a hold of the hind legs, pull straight up, and off comes the head. And if you've got, most of the time you've got a knife, you can split him open. You take out his insides, you can wash your hands, wash it out with snow. You got a good clean rabbit. And in doing so, when you do this, you want to check the heart, liver, the insides, just like a beef inspector checks beef at a slaughter plant. If it looks bad, you better get rid of it. The next thing I got here that most people hunt are quail. Where they're hunted, it's usually brushy fence rows, and a lot of briars. They seem to have more quail like up north of us, where there's more shrubs and cover, and they particularly like a fence row or cover going to and from feed, because they've got a lot of hawks and stuff that tend to feed on them. How to hunt them, you could just, it's a matter of walking along fence rows or walk, and when they get up, most of the time, I don't care how many times you've hunted them, they scare the hell out of you. A lot of people use dogs. You don't have to pay too much attention then, because the dog does the work for you. The size shot that they usually use on those vary from 7.5, 8s, and 9s. They're a small bird, so most of the guys, they just put them in your coat. You can tell usually where they're at when you're hunting, because they leave a lot of little trails in the snow, and if you're hunting when you haven't got any snow on and you come across a place where it looks like there's a pile of last night's leftovers or yesterday's lunch, when they roost of an evening, they all back together and they're all facing out, like in a circle. That's the reason you're supposed to never shoot a covey clear out, because they can't, like, I don't know what they really figured, shoot them down to like 5, 6 birds, but then a lot of times they say they group up with another covey, but that's primarily how they roost. They'll roost in a circle with all their heads out, kind of like the old covered wagon trades used to be, I guess. This past winter, I took my grandson out to pick a Christmas tree, and we had him up on my shoulders, and we kicked up this covey of quail, and they went flying off, and pretty quick I heard one whistle, and I don't know if I can whistle now. I was practicing all day on this. And I said, "You want to hear them quail?" And he said, "Yeah." So I went. He sits up there, and pretty quick, why, quail answers back. So, he tapped me on the head, I said, "Yeah." So we started walking real slow forward. And sure enough, we walked up and didn't hear that wall before that quail come running out there, looking around. And I keep doing that. And boy, he thought that was something. And I have practiced on that, and a lot of game when you're out hunting, you can imitate different birds and stuff, and you'd be surprised. That's what I like about nature. You'd be surprised imitating different calls of different animals, and you'd be surprised at what you can bring in. I mean, they come in to see what's going on. Okay, the next thing I got here was on pheasants. They're a well-hunted bird, and they primarily like cornfields and fence rows, and they like to roost out into your grass fields and stuff like that. And you hunt them by walking fence rows, grass fields, and they're kind of hunted in different ways too, which sometimes is kind of dangerous, as one person well knows that's here tonight. Some places they hunt them by they put a blocker up ahead and then they come down walking through. Well, sometimes these guys, when they're walking through here, they don't know where the blocker's standing, and you could get shot. So you gotta know who you're hunting with, how you're hunting, and you can use dogs on them, which most people do that really do a lot of pheasant hunting. The size shot they use on those are usually 4s, 5s, and 6s. Of course, again, the gun is up to the hunter, the choice of caliber that he like, or the gauge that he likes to use. If you're going to track them in the snow, you can tell. Usually, you can tell a rooster. They take a longer stride when they're running. They got a bigger chicken foot print. A hen that I have noticed that they got a smaller foot, and they always kind of leave their back toe kind of leaves a little crooked mark. So if you got no dog and you're doing a little tracking, why you kind of know what you're tracking before you can keep on going, because we all know we aren't supposed to shoot hens. Most of the people on pheasants, they just carry them in their coat. Few people dress them. The next thing I got here was on ducks and geese. That's hunted a lot around here. Where around here we hunt ducks, you can hunt them on overflow ponds, rivers, and preserves. Most of the time I hunt like over to Willis Slough or go to some of these places. And it's like Mike said a while ago, if you think duck hunting's cheap, it sure isn't. You start out, you've got a $6.50 Indiana stamp, a $15 federal stamp. You've got to have your regular hunting license. A $12, the cheapest about you can get off with, a $12 box of, and I might state here, on waterfowl you have to use steel shot. If you get caught even with a lead on you while you're over there, it'll cost you more. And normally when you go duck hunting, then you've got to have like waders, because if you go out with somebody, you haven't got any waders, and these other guys got to get out and do your work, why you only go once with them. In the same way when retrieving ducks. If you got waders on, you don't have to go out and pull the boat out every time, which is a job sometimes, because sometimes the blinds aren't really enough cover there. You got to put them way over, see? Okay. When I've hunted ducks, a lot of the guys, they just shoot, they make pretty much of a deal out of it that you shoot the drakes only, which stands to reason. You have more ducks hatch out next year. And a trick to duck hunting, if there's a couple of you in the blind, and most of the time there's 3, it takes 2 to draw to be eligible to even get in a blind, but you can take 3. Most of the time, if you knock a duck down, a lot of guys have dogs, but it's a good practice. Like if the guy on the end of the blind shoots a duck and you're down here and you don't get a shot, you get a mark on, like he went down over at that, well, we'll say that thing, whatever, on the wall, and this guy, and he's watching, and you can get a cross-reference on where that duck went down if he goes down in cattails and stuff like that. And that works practically with all game. For example, one time, I'll give an example out here. I was out by myself hunting, and come up on this pond, and duck got up. I shot the duck, I hit it, it flew on across, going towards the not the highway, the county road, and all of a sudden down it went. All right, how am I going to get around here to go around there and never find that duck? So I found out that you got to use some ingenuity. It breaks down these willows. I get sights up with a highline pole across the field, go around the pond, come back up, get my willows, my highline pole sighted up, I takes off, and there's the duck. Just a trick of finding stuff. And on all waterfowl, you have to make an effort to find it. When they have an early season, usually take a cooler along because it gets pretty warm over there on the early goose season and duck season when it starts in September. Most of the time, take a cooler with a jug of ice in it because you freeze it up and you got drinking water, and plus it keeps your game warm. On these ducks, I brought in a couple decoys to show you what they usually use. This is kind of an old one, but nowadays they've got things that, I mean, they're 4 times this size. The duck will be, a decoy will be this big. In fact, sometimes over there anymore, when you go over, there's hardly room for anybody in the boat. They've got, well, they actually pull even along another boat to carry the stuff. And they got a trolling motor and 3 guys, and if you get 4 or 5 bags of them great big decoys and your boat cushions and guns and shells and everything, sometimes a lot of them pull boats. This decoy is a old timer. It's shot. Had a real old friend of mine give me this. These, they used to be able to just squash them up for like carrying. You could throw a bunch of these in your coat pocket, a dozen of them, you aren't carrying nothing. You get out the water, you just plop him on there and he pops right up there, see? In the goose, and of course when the duck calling, everybody's got a duck call. Some of them don't sound so good. Once in a while we holler across, what else did you get for Christmas? They all sound different. Got to get Mike over here, he's good. And along with duck hunting, some ducks are banded. There's a lot of geese that's banded. We was talking about, Mike was